Hello LAI 514 and or 414. In our video today, we are going to be covering chapters 5 through 7 of content area writing. Daniels and his co-authors begin to shift their focus in their 5th chapter titled Public Writing. Instead of focusing on brief assessments and comprehension checks, they broaden their focus to well-developed composition, or as they put it, highly polished pieces that can go out into the world. They refer to this sort of composition as planned public writing, which is, quote, highly intentional, pragmatic, and consciously arranged. One of the main concerns of public writing is the consideration of one's audience. When writing, students ought to reflect on how they can adapt their use of language in order to effectively communicate to their audience, often their peers and teachers, and sometimes members of the local community. The authors break down the facets of public writing by explaining the most common traits as being substantial, planned, authoritative, conventional, composed, edited, and graded. Let us take some time to go into the details of each trait so we might better understand the author's view of this process-oriented writing. First, public writing by nature is comparatively substantial. While each content area has its own parameters of what constitutes a lengthy composition, we are certainly moving past assignments such as journal entries, exit tickets, and weekly reflections. As we've previously mentioned, public writing also has to be planned in order to be effective. While a journal prompt could be written on a whim, any essay requires at least a brief planning period where students might make an outline, graphic organizer, or even rewrite to clarify their argument. Public writing also carries an authoritative tone, where the writer assumes a stance in order to assert their interpretation. The tone is also part of public writing being conventional. These conventions are adhered to in order to satisfy the audience of the text. These conventions also include style and formatting. For example, an English major is expected to utilize the formatting conventions of MLA, while an education major is expected to adhere to the APA guidelines. Further, Daniels and his co-authors point out how public writing is composed. This composition entails a process which often includes drafting, rewriting, revising, and editing that's much more methodical than magical. Of course, no two processes are alike. Some teachers believe in writing this process so much that they prescribe a specific sequence of steps that must be followed. Personally, I disagree with such a tactic, but some students might actually benefit from such strict structuring. Before we move on to the final two traits of public writing, I'd like everyone to pause and reflect on their own writing process. Is there something specific that you absolutely have to do in order to write? Has a teacher ever required you to demonstrate your process by turning in an artifact in conjunction with your final product, such as like an outline or a graphic organizer? How did this prescribed step affect your writing? A crucial step of this process is the editing stage. If writing does not meet spelling and grammar expectations, then the audience might quickly dismiss the argument, even though it could be a good argument. Finally, public writing is typically graded. Each teacher has their own philosophy when it comes to grading, but at the end of the day, students need feedback. This feedback needs to be supportive of the student as a developing writer, not merely marks on a page to justify a grade. Daniels and his co-authors continue by explaining how to make this processed writing accessible and effective. The first step is to give students choice about their writing topics. When we release some agency to our students, they are much more likely to take ownership of both their writing and their learning in general. If students seek their learning, they are, of course, more engaged. Moreover, students need dedicated class time for this pursuit. I believe the third suggestion, a response, should also have dedicated class time. It seems that peer editing with proper scaffolding is a highly effective way for students to receive feedback. These sessions will inevitably address local issues, but more importantly, any global issues. Peter Smagorinsky argues that the most apparent benefit of approaching writing as a process is that students benefit from feedback as they work, rather than just at the end. This continual feedback, in my opinion, is something all teachers ought to strive for, regardless of their content area. If students are not receiving feedback on their writing, whether it be corrective or supportive, then how can we reasonably expect them to mature as writers? Speaking of being reasonable, though, it is truly unreasonable for teachers to expect themselves to give constant feedback for every student throughout the writing process. This is one of the many reasons that students ought to be scaffolded the skill set to offer and receive constructive criticism from their peers. Using online forums such as blogs or Google Docs as a space for students to interact with each other is a great way to mediate some of the workload in a positive manner. Novakovich writes how publishing work in progresses on a course blog provides a great deal of affordance for the instructor in terms of managing and overseeing student work, allowing for a greater degree of control over students' levels of engagement and cooperation, and, furthermore, students are motivated to perform when their work is published online. If the access to this technology is available, I don't see any reason why a teacher wouldn't consider using such a model for creating peer groups. No matter who is giving the feedback, though, it is crucial that students understand how to receive that feedback. Let's get some insight into the art of feedback from Harvard Law professor Sheila Heen.
15 years ago, my colleagues at the Harvard Negotiation Project and I wrote a book called Difficult Conversations. And I spent the last couple of decades traveling around the world helping people and organizations with some of their most challenging conversations. Now, the first thing that we do when we work with any group is that we say, well, what are your toughest conversations? What would you like some help with? And together we make a list that we can draw from throughout the day. Now, over the years, we started to notice a pattern, which is that feedback showed up on that list a lot. To put a finer point on it, feedback was on that list 100% of the time. It didn't matter what continent we were on. It didn't matter what industry we were in. It didn't even matter why they brought us in. People and organizations all over the world struggle with feedback. Now, for the first 10 years, we did what I think everybody does, which is that we taught givers how to give, more skillfully, more clearly, more often. How many of you have ever been to a session on how to give feedback? Did it help? Okay, please say yes, because I do some of that work. But your reaction echoes my own experience, which was, it helps. I mean, there's a lot you can learn, but it wasn't solving the problem. And then one day it occurred to us, you know what? In any exchange of feedback between giver and receiver, it's the receiver who's in charge. I mean, it's the receiver who decides what they're going to let in, what sense they're going to make of it, and whether and how they choose to change. I mean, maybe we've been going about this totally backwards. Maybe the key is learning how to take in the blizzard of feedback that we come in contact with every day. I mean, feedback is really our relationship with the world, and it's the world's relationship with us. I mean, what if we could actually see receiving feedback as a skill? And we could get better at learning from feedback, taking charge of it and driving our own learning. So we don't have to wait around for good givers to show up. What if we could draw learning out of even off-base, unfair, poorly delivered feedback? What would happen? What the research shows is that people who go out and solicit negative feedback, and by that what they mean is they're not just fishing for compliments. They're looking for what they can improve. Those people report higher work satisfaction, They adapt more quickly in new roles, and they get higher performance reviews, which suggests that if you get better at handling everybody's feedback for you, it doesn't just change you. It changes how other people see you and experience you.
Feedback is our relationship with the world, and it's the world's relationship with us. I really enjoyed the way she gets us to think about these parallel terms. If we continually remind our students of this, they're going to have a growth mindset. That being said, I'm Jason Riley, signing off. Logan is going to continue to explain how we might support the writing processes of our students as seen in chapters 6 and 7. Thank you.
My name is Logan Seiferth. Today I'll be talking to you about chapter 6 and 7 in the book. So chapter 6 is about the process of writing and how teachers can help support their students with their assignments. So on the first page of the chapter we have Stan and Sherry. So Stan is that older style type of teacher. He's going to give you the assignment. He's going to give you, okay, it's 10 pages, it's due in 2 weeks, pretty much good luck, right? And then we have Sherry, who is going to be more helpful with the students. She's going to give you journals to read. She's going to, make sure that the students are aware that she's available all the time. You can come to my office hours if you need it. So I wanted to ask you guys, in your personal experience, have you dealt with a Sherry or a Stan? For myself, the Stan wasn't really in my school. It wasn't really present in my school. Every teacher that I pretty much had was extremely helpful. You can come to my office hours. The computer lab's always open. The librarian as well was, she was also there during office hours, ready to help us out. So, and what this does is, what the Sherry type of teacher will do is enhance risk-taking for the students. So if you go to page 122 in your book, I have mine out, it's the italicized part. It's just about the teacher repeatedly saying, make sure you're thinking outside the box. Make sure you're trying to get a topic or write differently than you have before. It makes it more exciting for the teacher to read, but it's also a different way for the student to learn the material. And that's what we want. I mean, that's the bottom line here. It's they're not just becoming better writers, they're learning as well. And we want this to be a great way for them to learn. So another thing we also want for the students to get comfortable with is writing for an audience. So a way that I think is great for people to get comfortable with that is public speaking. I always recommend people who are younger than me to take a public speaking class because it not only gets you more socially active, speaking in front of maybe a camera or in front of people, but you have to write all of your speeches before you speak. So you're practicing how to write what you're going to say. And I think it's extremely helpful because you're writing for an audience and then you're also speaking for an audience. Of course, also, peer reviews, having the students work together, write together. Maybe you have them write a first draft and then they can come in and then hand it to another student and then they can read it. Maybe not mark it or give negative feedback, of course, but just things that they believe the students can work on. It's a great way to get the students interacting, and it's not just you doing the grading and that's it. I guess just to maybe kind of wrap it up about the conversation with that is to make sure that we're taking our time as teachers when we're talking to our students or getting them to learn how to write with our students. We can't rush this, right? So we have to make sure that the students are aware of what they're doing and that the writing assignments are there for them to learn and so that they're ready for it in the future. So that wraps up chapter 6 and the main points about chapter 6. And now we're going to talk about chapter 7. And chapter 7 is about shorter writing projects that can help with writings that are about 2 to 3 pages long. So when I was reading the chapter, I was thinking about creative ways that I've done in the past, or maybe that I was thinking about that could help with this kind of project. And the first thing that I thought of was creative writing. So that was kind of in the chapter when it came about with faction, but I love the idea of creative writing. It gets students to maybe not write a novel, but something similar to that, a couple pages long. It's their own imagination, and it gets them thinking what they want to write about, right? So it's not you picking a topic for them. They get to choose their own topic, and they get to write freely about it. Another way, and it's something that I've done, was assigned in college, but I think it could definitely relate to kids in middle school and high school, was an op-ed paper. So an op-ed is sort of like a blog. How would you write a blog about something? And I thought it was great. I've never written a paper like that before. All my papers are usually just like a term paper, step 1, step 2, step 3, and that's it. So an op-ed, it gets a little bit more personable. I still had to do a little bit of research, but I had fun doing it because I could make it my own. I got to choose my topic. I got to choose what I wanted to say as if I was actually just typing it on the computer. So I guess I just wanted to ask you guys, and you guys can let us know, what about maybe projects that you've done or projects that you've been thinking about doing in your own classroom, or maybe just thinking right now about something? What maybe like and it could be based off of one of the 6 options that were given in the book, or it could be something completely different. What is a good project that's acceptable middle school, intermediate? It could be even preschool. It doesn't matter. Just something to write that could be creative, different than your average just term paper, Venn diagram type of thing, to get students creative and active in the writing. So yeah, let us know. We're definitely very interested in reading those. I'm interested as well. I'd like to learn more myself about it and what you guys have to offer us as well. That's something that I've been interested. I've been reading your guys' comments throughout the videos, and I feel like I'm learning a lot just from reading you guys and your ideas. And I think that's what this chapter might be trying to get at, is getting these students to learn more by not just going through chapters and reading the books, but outside materials. The internet is great for some things, but it's also great for learning about topics that are related to our class. Just to wrap it up, I just want to say that I guess another point that comes from these chapters is that it doesn't matter what subject you're trying to teach. It's all relevant with writing and having students learn from it. So there was science examples, math examples, and then history and English as well. It all works with writing and learning from writing. So, and personally, I didn't think that writing could be a huge part of math, but it can be. And I've learned that from just reading these texts and even doing a little bit of practice myself with classes that I'm in right now. Just writing short reflections, talking to the teachers about what I can do to help better my understanding of the material, and then writing it down. It's a great way, and it'd be great to have students learn that earlier, middle school, high school, than until they get into college and they start learning that. All right, so yeah, just let us know about these 3 chapters, things that have come up, new things that you guys have thought of, whether it's a project or something like that. Make sure you let us know. And yeah, thank you guys.